Welcome, traveller. Before we set out, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? From a quiet apartment in Xi'an, a seaside room in Istanbul, or somewhere far in between? Share your place on the map and then settle in. Breathe slowly. Let the road carry you. The city wakes slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the silk of morning. Within the warded grid of Chang'an, watchmen unbar the wooden gates that divide neighbourhood from neighbourhood, and the first vendors push their handcarts toward the great market. The drum tower gives a measured beat that tells everyone the same thing without a single word. The night's curfew is over. Business may begin. Smoke rises in thin blue threads from breakfast stalls. Millet porridge, steamed buns, skewers brushed with oil and salt. Porters knot their headcloths, muleteers check harness rings with pinched fingers, and somewhere a stringed peeper tests the day with 3 shy notes. Our caravan master has been awake since the darkest watch. On his table lie 3 piles: travel permits with vermilion seals, copies of contracts written in a neat clerk's hand, and a packet of blessings from a monastery scribe, each ink character a wish for safe return. He runs through the lists again, not because he doubts them, but because certainty is a kind of talisman. Silk bolts are counted and grouped by grade, plain, patterned, and brocade, each tied with cloth bands dyed to mark weight and destination. Ceramics are wrapped in straw and stacked within bamboo baskets. Lacquer bowls and inlaid boxes nest inside one another like careful thoughts. Paper sheets ride in protective cases that keep them dry and flat. Tea is pressed into dense cakes stamped with the mark of the estate. A shallow chest of coins and silver ingots waits near the door, heavier than its size suggests. Silk serves as money in some places. Coins speak better in others. On the road, choice is its own currency. The market is properly 2 markets, east and west, each a city within the city, with its own gates, timekeepers, guards and inspectors, who weigh and measure, then weigh and measure again. Inside, it is a geography of smell and colour, pepper and cinnamon, rawhide and lamp oil, orange persimmons next to green gourds, long-necked bottles of northern wine shining like fish scales. Scribes set up benches under awnings, ready to draft receipts and contracts in black ink. A money changer lays out nested bronze weights. Beside him, a jeweller rolls out a strip of cloth and sets down his touchstone. You can hear the Silk Road before you see it. Foreign tongues around the sesame cakes, the sighing breath of camels taking their rest, the small clatter of glass beads as a merchant's daughter threads a string and measures profit in the space between her fingers. Foreign traders are not decoration here. They are part of the city's breath. A Sogdian broker in a fur-trimmed cap discusses the price of horses from the western valleys, tracing numbers on the air with his fingertip. A man from far Bactria laughs as he bargains for paper. He has learned its usefulness and the quiet power of words that can be copied quickly. A craftsman from elsewhere in the empire shows indigo cakes, their surfaces bruised blue-black like the prelude to a storm. 2 elderly monks pass by with travel staffs and dustcloth shoes, speaking softly of a library and kucha, and a clerk from the granary counts grain sacks as though the city's stomach were a ledger to be balanced. Our first business is permits. At a low, timbered office, the guard captain presents rolled papers, and the caravan master bows as a clerk checks seals, dates, and the list of men and animals. The clerk stamps the margin with a block that leaves a red square like a small sunrise. He asks routine questions that are anything but trivial. How many stopovers are planned before the frontier? Who holds responsibility for the accounts? What arrangements are in place should the master fall ill? He notes the names of the guides, the origins of the camels, and the intended routes through the Hexi corridor. It is a dance of caution and confidence. The dancers know each step. While documents travel the short distance from table to stamp and back again, the quartermaster tests gear. Saddles are felt lined to prevent rubbing sores. Girth straps are softened with oil. spare shoes for the pack. Animals have been matched and bundled, each pair wrapped with its own nails tied in a little rag. The tool roll fits into a leather tube. Awls, needles, sail thread, a whetstone, small chisels, a knife that takes an edge easily and loses it just as easily, and another knife, clumsier but faithful. There are tarred ropes for weather, dry ropes for calm days, and braided lead ropes that will go from nose rings to nose rings, linking camels in a patient chain. Water skins hang from a rack like quiet brown fruit. The cook chooses provisions with the precision of a general. Millet and barley for porridge and gruel. Dried noodles packed in flat bundles that can be boiled quickly at midday. Salted mutton sealed against air and dust. Blocks of tea to be broken and brewed with a nod of thanks before dawn. Ginger, garlic, and a pouch of peppercorns that will make the night feel warmer when the wind forgets our names. He buys onions because they keep, dates because they comfort, and vinegar because it improves even poor water. He tucks away a jar of preserved plums, not telling anyone, because every long road deserves a small surprise at its midpoint. In the animal yard behind the market stalls, our camels wait with the stoic patience of creatures who have seen this all before. Bactrian, 2 humps like dunes, shaggy coats that will serve us well in high passes and cold nights. The camel boss whistles low and speaks to them by name. He checks teeth and knees, hooves and humps, and the underpinning that holds load steady against movement and time. Each animal has a number and a temperament, and the loading plan respects both. The strongest will carry the heaviest bales out of Xi'an, and again when we climb into the mountains. The quick-tempered will stand mid-train to keep them occupied. The mother with a calf will be kept toward the rear where the pace is kinder. He ties a small bell to the halter of the lead camel, a constant sound that settles nervous hearts and keeps the train together when dust or darkness tries to fold the world closed. The scribe sits cross-legged on a mat and copies inventory with the focused calm of someone mending fate. He writes what leaves the city, the number of silk bolts and their grades, the count of tea bricks, the tally of lacquer and paper, the crates of ceramics flanked by baskets of straw. He notes the tools that protect the tools, the leather covers for the weighing scales, the spare cords that secure the spare cords. In the margin, he adds the names of men joining us, handlers, guards, 2 interpreters, a young apprentice who carries nothing heavier than questions, and a healer who opens his wrapped bundle only when asked. The healer's burden is light as a sparrow. Needles for acupuncture, dried herbs, strips of clean cloth, a mortar that fits into his palm, and a knack for listening that sometimes cures more than medicine. Before the last seals are pressed, we make a small detour. At a temple courtyard shaded by ginkgo trees, travellers tie red threads to a wooden rail, each thread a hope. Smoke from a stick of incense drifts toward the faded paintings beneath the eaves, where guardian figures hold back what has no name. The caravan master says nothing aloud. His silence is its own offering. When we step back into the sunlight, the market's voices seem gentler, as if the city itself has nodded to our leaving. Back at the loading yard, the practice begins. A bale of silk climbs the yoke, is balanced by its twin on the other side. A cord goes forward, one goes back, both pulled until the bale sighs into place. The rule is simple and absolute. Equal weight, secure lashings, nothing that can chafe. The experienced hands move in pairs, calling measurements without tape or scale, their bodies remembering what the mind no longer needs to think. The guard captain walks the line, eyeing spear shafts and bowstrings, counting arrows and spare bowstrings, checking the padded jackets they will wear at the passes where wind makes armour out of cold. He talks quietly about tolls and the etiquette of meeting patrols, about where to ride wide and where to ride close, and when to let silence negotiate first. Contracts are concluded in a tea stall where the shade is wide and the owner knows when not to ask questions. The Sogdian broker signs with a mark he has used in cities far from here. The local guild representative presses a seal into clay that will dry hard on the cord of a chest. Profit shares are set. The cost of losses is distributed in writing that looks calm even when the heart's behind it not. 2 witnesses sign in deliberate strokes. The money changer counts out dirhams and cash coins until the piles look like little walls. The caravan master counts twice more until they look like peace of mind. Midday falls like a soft hand on a restless shoulder. The inspectors return with their final approval, and the clerk ties a narrow strip of red paper to the lead rope. We are not yet leaving the city, but the city is already loosening its hold. Apprentices run errands to buy what was forgotten. An extra awl, a second lamp wick, a small compass to humour the young, who like instruments as much as they like stories. The camel boss gives a boy a coil of rope and tells him to learn the lay of it by closing his eyes. The boy obeys with a seriousness that makes the older men smile without letting him see. As the afternoon leans toward evening, the market grows louder and then abruptly quieter. Rules are part of life here. When the drum tower speaks again, the ward gates will close and the night watch will begin. We make one last pass through the lists. The cook wraps the iron pot that will hang from a pole. The healer tucks his herbs away from rain and curious fingers. The scribe dries the last line of ink and lays sand over it, so the characters will not smudge. Harness bells are muffled with cloth for the city streets. The caravan master rips a narrow strip from a damaged silk wrapper and ties it around his wrist. It is not fashion, it is a reminder. We will not push out under the full heat of morning tomorrow. The plan is gentler and older than any of us. Rise in the cool, move before the sun's hard edge arrives, rest at noon when animals and men both prefer stillness, and in the evening when shadows lengthen and the city's breath slows, pass through the western gate like a river that has found its channel. Tonight, we sleep within the walls one last time, the city around us like a parent whose advice we finally understand. Lanterns are lit, the last tea is poured. Somewhere a storyteller begins a tale about a road so long you could walk it for a lifetime and still find yourself surprised at every bend. No one argues with him. Outside the stall our camels kneel, patient and unreadable, their shadows stretching toward the place where the wall will open and the world will tilt west. The land narrows into a long wind-polished hallway. On our left the Xi'an mountains shoulder the sky, their snow-bright ridges feeding thin silver threads that vanish into fields and ditches. On our right the grit-dark Gobi crawls outward until colour gives up. Between them runs the road, beaten earth, shards of old pots, prints of hoof and wheel layered so deeply it feels like a script everyone can read. This is where marching armies, mail couriers and caravan trains all must pass, and so someone has always kept count. We leave the last mulberry groves behind at dawn. The drum of Chang'an has become a memory, replaced by the steady clink of the lead camel's bell. Breath hangs visible for a few minutes, then disappears as the sun finds us. The wind is leaner here, it doesn't fuss, it strips. Our guides mark the day's plan in quiet phrases. A first leg before the light hardens, a shaded halt near a reed-lined ditch, a second push, and camp near a watchtower if the well is not brackish. They speak not in miles, but in hours of animal pace and in the names of landmarks, the 3 tamarisk bushes, the broken kiln, the hill that looks like a crouched dog. The corridor teaches you to measure the world by what you can actually touch. Watchtowers rise every so often from the plain, rammed earth baked into a stubborn tan. Some are square, some hexagonal, some nothing but a scarp and a tumble of brick where time has already eaten its share. Each one belonged to a network, platforms for smoke by day and fire by night, relaying news faster than hooves could carry it. Wolf dung is kept dry in jars at their base. When burned, it makes a smoke that clings and climbs, a column that can be read from far away. A soldier with a horn combs sand from his moustache and nods as we pass. He checks the tokens we carry, narrow slips stamped with seals that tell any patrol we are accounted for. He doesn't smile until the camel calf nuzzles his sleeve. The corridor is not a single unbroken line, but a chain of oases and fortified stops. Liangzhou, Ganzhou, Juquan, Dunhuang farther on. Between them, the land is a riddle solved by water. Canals stitched from mountain runoff make a filigree across pale soil. Villages huddle beside them, surrounded by barley fields green enough to shock the eyes after hours of dun-coloured ground. Every drop here is explained, measured and defended. The farmers we pass count time by the sound of sluice gates and the turn of water wheels, creaking wooden spirals that lift canal water to higher beds so that grain can shoulder its way up through the dust. At midday we lay out canvas for a strip of shade. The cook sets a little brazier on beaten earth and coaxes fire from a spark cup and tinder. Tea is a negotiation with water and time. The first pour to rinse the dust, the second to drink. We eat flatbread warmed on the iron, onions cut with the knife that is sharp enough for food and dull enough for safety, a narrow pinch of salted mutton. No one lingers. The sun does not encourage debate. The guard captain walks the perimeter of our resting place, scanning the ground for the marks of other parties. He points out how fresh the hoofprints are, how the heel of a boot drags when a man is tired, how a skitter of pebbles at the bank of the ditch means someone filled water skins not long ago. Nothing is ceremonial out here. Everything is information. We approach the frontier stations with the same mixture of resignation and respect felt by every traveller since the first seal was pressed into clay. Yumenguan lies low until you're nearly upon it, then resolves into raked earth walls and a gate whose wood has been lifted and replaced so often it looks like a palimpsest. The Jade Gate, less a jewel than a hinge. Officials wait at a shaded desk with ledgers and weighing pans. Behind them, a post-route map painted on board shows towers, wells and distances, tiny red squares for beacon sites, tiny black dots for inns. A clerk with an inkstone the size of his palm checks our documents and asks for the lists again, his brush whispering across paper in strokes that feel like small, careful exhalations. He measures a sample of the silk with practiced fingers, glancing not at the patterns but at the uniformity of the weave. He taps one of the tea bricks with a knuckle and listens for the right sound, then breaks a corner to smell the interior. A guard along the wall strolls slowly, not to intimidate but to remind us that the state has eyes. Our scribe answers questions so they arrive pre-softened. Number of animals, number of men, number of days provisioned until the next confirmed well, declaration of blades and bows, statement of intended route, northern or southern line around the Great Desert, surety for taxes payable on return. He keeps his tone even, the way a man smooths the surface of a bowl to read the tea leaves more clearly. The clerk nods, stamps the margin with vermilion, and slides a tally stick across the table, a notched length of wood that will be matched to its twin at the next post, ensuring no one has swapped our trust for theirs. The toll is paid in a blend of coin and promise. The promise is countersigned. We're not merely passing, we're being stitched into a record. On the far side of the gate the road feels changed, though the earth is the same. We're in the long throat of the Hexi, where the world encourages straight lines, straight canals, straight walls, straight winds. Here the Great Wall is not only brick battlements from a later age, but older ramparts of rammed earth, long bruises across the land thrown up by hands and baskets, then hardened by sun and intent. Patrols ride 2 and 2, their horses' tails tied with cord to stop the hairs tangling in the gusts. We exchange greetings that are more like checklists. Water, water, bandits, none seen. Weather, westerly, rising by evening. They note our bell and our camel calf and keep their own counsel about luck. By late afternoon the light cuts lower and the ground fidgets with shadows. We make camp near a tower whose sides still hold a squared-off corner against slumping. The routine rehearses itself. Animals are unburdened and hobbled. Loads are stacked in a low horseshoe facing inward, with the most valuable items near the cook fire where eyes will be constant. Tents go up in a ring, guy lines pulled taut and checked twice. The healer sets a pot to boil and drops in herbs that smell like a meadow remembering spring. He looks at a handler's blister, shakes his head at the rope burns that only patience will cure, and slides needles into a guard's shoulder where worry keeps catching. He says little, and all of it lands softly. Night is its own kind of official. Once the brazier glows and the first stars show, the desert stops pretending to be empty. Sound carries cleanly. A fox investigating the leavings at the edge of the ring, the faint whisper of sand slumping down from some far ridge, a croak from the ditch where frogs defy dryness with stubborn yearly logic. The watch schedule is marked with pebbles in a bowl, one pebble lost to each hour, and a roster hangs beside the guard captain's sleeping mat. He walks the outer ring and listens as much as he looks. We all do. A good camp has a particular silence, like a held note. A bad camp has edges on its quiet. Morning in the corridor does not arrive. It is admitted cautiously, like a guest whose temper is unknown. We load from habit. Each bale knows its companion and each cord its knot. The camel boss rubs a stubborn knee with warmed oil. The boy apprentice, who was given a coil of rope and told to learn it, now ties a hitch without looking. He gets a nod that means as much to him as silver. When we walk out, the lead bell chimes once and begins its steady account of the distance between us and where we started. The road teaches endurance by parceling it, to the next waymark, to the next canal, to the next shade. We pass trenches where old bricks show and men chip them free for reuse, an economy that does not waste even the past. We pass kilns, their mouths dark, waiting for the season when fuel can be spared. We overtake a grain convoy, oxen dragging sledges loaded with sacks bound for a frontier granary, and make space on the path, because food takes precedence everywhere. The teamsters' faces are the colour of dust, but when the cook offers tea, they straighten and accept as if it were a temple rite. At one post station, a relay rider clatters in as we arrive, foam on the horse's bit, a stick with a wrapped message tucked against his forearm. He dismounts before the horse stops completely and passes the stick to a waiting hand. Another rider is already swinging into a fresh saddle. The whole exchange takes less time than it does to describe. The clerk gestures at the board map and says a message can leap from tower to tower by smoke in a day what would take a caravan a week in hooves. He is not bragging, only stating the geometry of power. The beacons themselves are as practical up close as they are romantic from a distance. There are jars for dried fuel, racks for torches, a windscreen that lets a single man coax flame in a gale. A cistern sits half-buried beside the tower, a cool belly where water waits with the patience of stone. On the wall, someone long ago carved a name and a date, and an animal that might be a dog or a lion depending on your heart. Another hand carved over it, a later year, a different animal. Time stripes the corridor like a tiger. At Juquan, Wine Spring, though the well tastes like iron, we trade a pair of tea bricks for a skin of sour sweet wine that makes the guards laugh and the cook shake his head. The magistrate's yard hosts a market that looks like a reduced version of Chang'an. Ropes, awls, bow cases, felt caps, winter coats that will matter when the passes rise. An old woman sells dried apricots in a basket lined with paper. She haggles like a general and wins like one too. A tinker mends a cracked pot by stitching its edges with soft metal wire, then sealing the seam with resin that smells like cedar. The scribe buys a new brush and a tiny stone seal carved with a character that means return. He does not call it an omen, he calls it a wish held in the hand. The inspector here asks questions we have already answered at the Jade Gate, then asks different ones because no two checkpoints are the same mind. Where did you hear bandits last? Which caravanserai stocks the best farrier? Which well is now bitter because the upstream canal is clogged with silt? He notes our answers in a book whose pages are more thumbed than the law requires. Information moves in both directions on this road, not just goods. The corridor survives because it is curious about itself. Wind comes hard in the afternoons, a broad hand pushing. We learn to lean without noticing. Sand finds every opening, the crease of the eye, the fold in a shirt, the seam in a bag, and claims it. The camel boss wraps cloth around his face and teaches the boy to wet his scarf so the dust cakes on the outside instead of his throat. The guards tuck their bows under their arms to keep grit from the string. We are all smaller here, and that is not a humiliation. It is an instruction. When it rains, it does so like a revelation. Sudden, slanting, flung across the plain like thrown beads, then gone. The smell rises rich and impossible, as if the ground has remembered something it loved. We stop and let the animals drink from puddles before the thirst of the earth pulls the water back down. The cook sets out a cloth to catch a little for tea and laughs when the wind flips it into a dance. For an hour the corridor is soft. Then the sun returns and the softness tightens into crust. At dusk, with the day's weight balanced and put away, stories loosen. A sentry at the tower tells how beacon fires once leapt down the line to warn of riders seen in the distance, how the message arrived in the prefecture long before hooves did, and how the prefect didn't believe it because who trusts a warning that travels so fast? He shrugs. In the end, the warning was true, and the speed became part of the reason the corridor still has towers. Our interpreter adds a tale of a merchant who tried to shortcut the desert and was turned back by mirages that braided the horizon until even his compass lost its patience. The healer tops the pot with a slice of ginger and says nothing, which adds more to the story than words. We pass the Yang Pass, less formal than the Jade Gate, a sibling with its own moods. The officer there keeps birds. He feeds them millet from his palm and watches the sky with the same attention he gives our papers. He asks after a man in our rear party by name, and when told the man is well, he closes his hand and nods. The corridor is grand in maps and small in memory. The two scales coexist without argument. Days inside this long hallway rearrange themselves in the mind. What you remember are the fixed points, the shadow of a tower at noon falling like a sundial hand, the cold that arrives fast when the sun slips, the peppery taste of dust, the exact strength of the tea when brewed at a particular ditch, the way an official's brush paused above a date while he considered whether to make us pay now or later. You remember the geometry of the land. One mountain range holding its shoulder to you, one desert keeping its distance, and you moving as the obvious solution between them. By the time we see the last long smear of Dunhuang's greenery after a string of smaller oases, the corridor has worked on us. We have learned how to measure our days in watchtowers and wells, how to read smoke and the gait of tired animals, how to accept that inspection is just another word for being part of a system that keeps the road open. We have been numbered and counted and, in being counted, joined. The bell keeps time, the wind keeps counsel, the road holds us steady, a narrow promise stretched tight between stone and sand. Dunhuang appears first as a rumour of green, a soft line on the horizon after so many days of tan and rust. Then the trees resolve, poplar and willow, and the scent of damp soil reaches us like a familiar name. Irrigation ditches cross our path with dragonfly water, and boys with rolled-up trousers drive geese from one muddy bank to another. A wind comes down the Dang River valley, smelling of reeds and something sweet we can't quite place. The camels lift their heads, tasting the shift in the air, and their steps lighten as if memory itself were a feed bag hung before them. We enter the town under an arch where notices paste the official face of the world to plaster. Lists of taxes due, warnings about counterfeit seals, a proclamation praising a patrol that chased bandits into the hills. Beneath the notices, vendors set out shallow baskets of dried apricots and walnuts. Their skins seemed like miniature maps. A farrier with soot under every nail hammers a rivet, and sparks skip like fleas into dust. Dunhuang is not a great capital. It is a hinge, grain and water on one side, desert on the other, and everything here understands that function down to the angle of a door latch. We find lodging at a yard with thick gates and a narrow shaded passage that opens into a rectangle of light. Stalls line one side for the animals, on the other, A long room for men with sleeping platforms and a twined mat that will become a common table by evening. The yard keeper meets us with a practiced look that counts heads and hooves without moving his lips. When we settle the animals, he nods at the bell on our led camel as if recognising an old song. He gestures toward the well in the corner. A girl hauls a bucket and does not spill a drop. We pay in coin and in confidence. Both are expected and both will be remembered. Before we seek the caves, we go to the spring at the edge of the dunes, a crescent of water cupped like a thumbprint. The sand hills around it rise in long, fluted backs, and when the wind tumbles down their spines, we hear the low hum people call singing. Some say it's the skin of the world tightening and loosening. Others say it's trapped air complaining about being told what to do. We take off our shoes and let the cold water shear the heat from ankles and shins. Our cook fills skins from the clear side, avoiding the shallow edge where children stir the silt with sticks in serious conversation. From here, the path bends along the river, away from the market noise and toward a cliff that looks at first like a simple face of rock, and then, as you draw near, like a hive of entrances. The Mogao cliffs aren't grand from a distance. They're precise up close. Rectangles, arches, little wooden porches clinging like swallow nests. Steps cut into stone, patched with timber where the cliff has opinions of its own. We pass a gate where a quiet lay brother sits with a ledger. He asks the business of our feet: prayer, donation, curiosity, gratitude, or the wish to rest in cool shade. We are permitted to carry oil lamps but advised to trust the light that's already there. The scribe drops a small fee on the plank table, and the lay brother slides a thin wooden ticket back to us, its surface brushed with a character for mindfulness in ink so fresh it still smells like pine. We begin in a small cave, low enough that even the camel boss bows without argument. The first thing that happens is the temperature falling against our faces. The second is colour rising. Blues that feel like water held in place, greens cool as mountain shade, reds with the quiet confidence of embers. A bodhisattva turns slightly, as if answering a name. Flying figures, apsaras with ribbons that know more about air than we do, cross the ceiling with the ease of a single breath. A monk explains that mineral pigments do not fade if the light is kind. Azurite for blue, malachite for green, cinnabar for red, orpiment for yellow, carbon for black, chalk for white. He taps the plaster with a finger to show us the two layers, rough and fine, bound with wheat paste and animal glue, smoothed until the brush could glide like skates on winter water. In a larger cave, a seated Buddha anchors the space, his hands in a gesture of teaching that makes even the camel boss's shoulders drop. Around him run rows and rows of small Buddhas, each one a repetition with its own tiny difference, as if compassion were a pattern you could learn by tracing it again and again. In the dim upper corners, musicians play forever, lutes with pear-shaped bodies and short necks, flutes, drums, bells. One player twists the peeper behind her back, a flourish frozen in paint that makes our interpreter snort softly with delight. Behind the back playing, he whispers, as if revealing a secret chord. Donor portraits line the lower bands, men with top knots and measured beards, women in layered silk, a child holding a lotus bud he clearly wants to taste. Their hands are folded, their names neat in cartouches, merchants, governors, guild heads, caravan masters whose gifts turned pigment and plaster into a bridge between this life and the next. Off to one side, the scribe points out a tiny line of writing in a different hand and language, cramped but proud, likely added by a traveller who wanted his name sewn into this tapestry. The monk does not scold the addition. The wall is wide, he says, and heartbeats are short. The workshop is a cave in its own right, less holy but just as charged. Damp sand cools jars of glue, brushes dry with their tips wrapped in paper like little cocoons. A young painter grinds azurite on a stone until it gives up its deep brightness, then lifts his sleeve to wipe the sweat that risks falling into the bowl. A cartoon of a bodhisattva, Ink on paper lies on the floor, pricked along every line. The master holds a bag of charcoal dust, taps it against the paper, and when they lift the sheet, the wall beneath wears a soft constellation of dots, ready to connect into form. The master marks the eyes last. Apprentices are not permitted to lay them in. Where you put the gaze, he says, you put the breath. Between caves, the cliff face holds wooden galleries that connect one chamber to another. The carpentry is clever rather than grand. Wedges where the rock refuses nails, pegs cut to match the stubbornness of grain. Below, the river makes a small sound against stones. In one high cave, a towering wooden facade shelters a Buddha whose presence presses the air into order. We climb with care. Inside, we are not as moved by size as by the intimacy of brushwork at the hem of a robe. Tiny flowers rendered with the attention people usually reserve for grief or love. Candles and oil lamps flicker, but the air does not feel smoky. Niches in the walls draw it upward, a quiet set of lungs breathed into the architecture. In a side chamber, a nun teaches 2 children letters on a wax tablet. The strokes of the character mirrored back to them until hand and eye agree. Next door, a scribe copies a sutra, his brush lifted and laid down with the steadiness of a man who long ago stopped thinking about steadiness. We watch the ink darken as it dries. In the margin, he notes the day and the name of the donor and a hope, simple and unadorned. Safe passage west, safe return east. Not everything here is devotion. Much is logistics disguised as grace. In the shade outside the main gallery, a monk and a trader review the map of oases like men drafting a poem with shared authorship. The northern route if the wells have been repaired near Hami, the southern one if the western wind keeps the dunes smooth past Khotan. Kashgar either way, the pass chosen by the politics of snow. They talk about Kares, underground channels that pull water across distances civil eyes cannot see, and which ones run sweet this year and which have silted with neglect. A courier steps in with a scrap of news from the pass. It changes the width of their smiles by the thickness of a fingernail. Decisions are balanced here on scales more sensitive than any merchant's. We make our own offerings, a bolt of plain silk modest and honest, a small purse toward lamp oil, and a promise to carry a packet of copied verses to a brother house farther west. The monk ties the packet with a narrow red cord and seals it with a thumbprint, speaking a name we do not know. The scribe records the transaction in our book, then writes the name again in his own margin, not for accounting, but so his mouth can practice it on the road when the wind and the stars make company thin. At the cliff base, a carver shapes a guardian king from clay over a wooden armature. The shoulders swell, the waist draws tight. The face is not angry but alert. He presses a real sandal strap into wet clay to take its texture, then peels it away and smiles at the trick. A bowl of crushed seashell sits near his knee, destined to become a sheen on armour. He mixes it with glue until it gleams like frost. When he talks, he doesn't look up. "We build with what the road gives us," he says. "Stone if we have it, clay if we don't, devotion either way." We sit in the shade at noon and share tea with a pilgrim from Kucha. He carries a roll of paper as carefully as if it were a sleeping child. Inside is a translation, a text that walked east in a tongue too few could read, dressed here in a script that will let it travel farther and live longer. The pilgrim tells us of teachers who move from cave to cave, memory to memory, until words wear grooves as water does. Our interpreter adds stories of Nestorian crosses in far courtyards, Zoroastrian fire kept in small stubborn bowls, later Sufi songs braided with thread spun here. No one argues. Road knowledge is an index of tolerance, updated daily. By evening, the cave mouths glow like eyes of warm animals bedded in a cliff. Lamps float along the galleries in slow lines. We help a monk lift an oil jar to a niche where a small flame will anchor the night. One of us whispers a personal request, too small for public hearing. The monk nods as if he already knew it. He probably did. With the last of the light, We sign a pledge in the ledger to return when we can, to send news whenever we cannot, and to sail our caravan onward with a mind lit like a lamp but shielded like a flame. Dunhuang's market wraps itself around our practical needs in the gentlest of grips. We buy felt boots lined with wool for the high passes and thin veils to tie over nose and mouth on sand days. The cook haggles for dried pears and for a pinch of saffron that will only be used when morale needs it more than tongues do. The healer finds a jar of camphor and a bundle of herbs that smell like waking up. The guard captain bargains for quivers and a second set of bowstrings, running the cords between thumb and forefinger the way a weaver tests warp. The camel boss inspects nose pegs for the new animals we plan to hire, and a coil of rope braided from hair that will not betray the knot with stretch. Information is the most valuable item we acquire. A man with sun-faded eyebrows marks a silk map with a thorn, updating the shapes of dunes as if correcting a memory. He taps the place where a well soured last season, and the place where a fig tree fell into water and sweetened it. An old woman at a stall full of needles and pins leans in to say that the wind has been lifting sand off the north rim earlier in the day. She says this while selling us a packet of mended needles because nothing in life is ever just one thing. A messenger boy, proud of his fast legs, recites a chain of caravanserais as if he were singing verse. The Han at Anxi, good farriers. The one near Yumen, watch your purses. The big one on the plateau, soup thicker than doors. We return to the caves one last time after dark. The stars sit low and near, and the dunes whisper their long, slow vowels. Inside a small chamber, a wall is painted with stories. The Monkey King leading his troop across a river, the Bodhisattva of compassion, with many arms each doing a different kindness, a king cutting flesh from his own arm to feed a dove he has sworn to protect. The painter's hand made mercy visible. All we have to do is recognize it. A child falls asleep against his mother's lap on the floor. His breath rises and falls to the rhythm of a drum painted 1,000 years ago. On our way out, we pass a low, locked door. A lay brother sets his palm on it as we go by, not to keep us out, but to greet whatever is kept within. Texts, perhaps, or relics, or the memory of a teacher. He does not explain. We do not ask. The road teaches curiosity, but it also teaches respect for the unopened. The next morning the cliff looks ordinary again until you have seen it. Then it looks like a mind made of stone, holding images so people who pass can borrow courage. We fill water skins at the spring, counting them out loud. The scribe tucks the sealed packet of verses deep in his chest, wrapped against sweat and chants. The monk at the ledger nods once, writes something small beside our earlier entry, and wishes our feet intelligence. On our way back through the market, a woman calls that the wind will come early. We adjust our veils. The bell on the lead camel answers the day's first question with its same patient note. We leave the smell of reed and plaster and lamp oil behind, and carry it anyway inside, light we can unpack wherever the road refuses to be kind. The desert does not begin with sand, it begins with a decision. Standing on the edge of Dunhuang's green, we face west and choose how to skirt the Taklamakan, the place you go in and do not come out. No caravan argues with the proverb. You do not cross the heart, you trace the rim, either north along Hami, Turfan, and Kusha toward Aksu, or south through Miran, Keria, and Khotan toward Yarkand and Kashgar. The choice is not romance, but arithmetic. The shape of the wind for this season, the temper of local rulers, the state of the wells, the price of fodder, the latest whispers about bandits who specialize in impatience. Our guides weigh news the way a money changer weighs coin, by the edge as much as by the face. Water becomes a calendar. We remap our days around it, start before the sun acquires its iron, halt near shade at noon, move again when the light softens, make camp within reach of sweet water, even if the distance left our legs full of sand. Rations are measured by ladle and by trust. A gourd, never a cup, goes down the line. Men first in rotation, animals next without fail. The cook keeps a ledger of water the way the scribe keeps one of silk bolts. There is no shame in thirst here, only a quiet, disciplined regard for everyone else's. We study the language of plants because plants know what maps guess. Where the earth-lipped tamarisk clumps there may be brackish water. Where desert poplar roots hold on, a shallow table lies beneath. Where reeds stand tight as soldiers, the ground gives to a thin shimmer if you dare it. The camel boss reads their postures like handwriting. He also reads the camels. Bactrians are professors of survival. 2 humps of economy. Split feet that splay soft over crust. Nostrils that close to a slit when the air turns to dust. Each carries roughly 150, sometimes 200 kilograms when the trail is kind. Less on a day shaped like a question. Pacing is law. A short dawn march, a long shadow march, always enough breath left to face weather that changes its mind without notice. When the wind hisses, we make ourselves small. In a sandstorm, you do not argue with direction, you erase it. Loads are dropped and marked with a stake and a tassel, so we can find them again when the world reappears. Camels kneel and are roped nose to tail, their flanks turned leeward. Men wrap veils over mouths and noses, wetting the cloth so grit cakes on the outside. The guard captain moves along the line, laying a hand on every shoulder. A tally you feel rather than hear. Sand is patient mischief. It finds the hinge of an eyelid, the seam of a boot, the joint of a bow. Afterward we dig our gear out like archaeologists of the immediate past, shake the dunes from our pockets, and go on without commentary. The desert never apologizes. Neither do we. When we take the northern line, the horizon scrawls the Karlik and Bogda ranges in charcoal and ice. Hami appears first, courtyard walls and melon fields, an oasis town that does not think of itself as small, because water makes any place large. Here we trade silk for fodder and information. The best news is about Turfan, which sits low in its great basin, so low that heat pools there like poured bronze. We plan for it as for a siege, marches in the blue-grey hour, veils and conical hats at noon, rest in Karez-cooled compounds when the world outside clatters with light. The Karez are the region's quiet genius. Imagine a mother well bitten into the flank of the hills until it finds the aquifer, then a horizontal tunnel laid out with a slope so modest a patient drop of water can measure it, no more angle than a polite bow. Every 30 paces or so, a vertical shaft opens to the sky, venting heat and granting access for repair. From above, a Karez line looks like a string of beads pressed into earth, round mouths rimmed with clay or stone. Underground, the air is cool and smells of damp dust. Water travels in the dark to deny the desert its appetite, arriving at vineyards and fields without evaporating into rumour. Maintenance is calmer than prayer and almost as regular, scraping silt, shoring a wall, packing a leak with clay and woven brush. Whole neighbourhoods are built around the Karez mouths, and the grapes they feed hang in long pale curtains in the valley they simply call of grapes, dried on lattices, pressed into syrup, chewed by children who run errands that are also races. In Turfan's markets we learn a useful humility. Heat presses politics flat. People are direct. A man selling earthenware jars thumps each with the heel of his hand to prove its tone, then selects one for us, with a sound like a held note. A woman selling veils shows us the weave tight enough to stop dust without stealing breath. A farrier refits a shoe on the one horse we keep for scouting, and for a moment the rasp of metal on horn drifts into the shade and pretends to be music. We walk the ruins of older walls that say this place has been important many times and will be again, because water and crossroads are a curriculum history never graduates from. Westward the land buckles into the flaming mountains, ridges that, at noon, look as if the earth misplaced a kiln and left it on. We pass them by tact rather than defiance, letting time and shade do the heavy work. Farther on lies Kucha, where music is a language locals speak without thinking. In the courtyards, a lutenist holds her instrument behind her head in that impossible flourish painters love, and the rhythm catches even the guard captain when he allows himself to be a man instead of a job. Monks here carry sutras that have crossed as many borders as we plan to, their pages copied onto papers that rustle like well-cooked onion skins. Traders speak Sogdian, Chinese, Prakrit, a handful of Bactrian, and something they call the local speech that rolls like pebbles in a river. Contracts are written twice, once in the tongue of the payer, once in the tongue of the paid, and sealed in clay that remembers thumbs more faithfully than wax does in this heat. The northern chain tightens toward Aksu and then bends like an elbow. Between oases we navigate by things that keep their places, the sun's slow arithmetic, the wind's favourite song, and at night the faithful anchor of the North Star while the rest of the sky wheels around it like an attentive court. Our interpreter keeps a small astrolabe not because we need it. The guides laugh that his eyes are new but the stars are old, but because instruments reassure men who spend their lives on promises. Sometimes reassurance is worth the wait. When we take the southern line, the desert throws different problems and gifts. Miran's crumbling forts sit like loaves left a little too long in the oven. Their eroded faces still show the geometry of command in their bones. Dry rivers, called by names that remember water, trick us with pale beds and polished stones. Keria and Nia teach a different comprehension of green. Not wide fields, but slender bands of orchard, clinging to the river's braid. Fig and apricot trees standing as if gossiping over a shared wall. Here we hear the story, true by virtue of being told so lovingly, of the princess who smuggled silkworm eggs west in her hair to Khotan when marriage took her out of China. A legend used to explain why there is silk here that knows whispering secrets from two directions. Whether the tale is history or hymn matters less than its work. Stories carry techniques as efficiently as caravans carry tea. Khotan is the South's marvel and market. It lives by water and stone. The white jade and black jade rivers pour down from the mountains and rake their beds over and over until nephrite pebbles lie where the patient can find them. Men and boys wade mid-thigh, feeling with their soles for the heavy softness that is not like other stones. They lift each candidate and study it in the light, tongues darting out, a mason's habit, not a child's, to taste the stone skin for the cool, waxy promise they swear they can tell. Traders weigh the pebbles by hand, then by scale, and the vocabulary of jade expands to include mutton fat, moonlight, river ice, leaf vein. We exchange silk for stone and watch how both goods turned into vows in people's eyes. Silk promises future prestige. Jade promises to remain calm through generations. We learn desert craftsmanship that has nothing to do with object and everything to do with pace. Marching at night becomes a comfort. The bell on the lead camel gathers the group into a single moving breath. The sand cools. The wind stops arguing and becomes counsel. The cook walks with the brazier's coals banked in a clay pot. A small ember of continuity we can break open at halt to light the kettle, as if we were restarting a day. At midday, when even the shade flinches, we turn cloth into architecture. A wall of saddles, a roof of canvas, a bed of woven mat. Sleep comes like a deliberate act, rewarded as if by law. We wake with the skin powdered in fine dust and drink tea that tastes faintly of yesterday, and somehow the first time anyone ever boiled water for kindness. Every few days a caravanserai gathers us into its fact. Thick walls, a single gate, a courtyard ringed with stables and rooms, a cistern as important as a treasury. The ledger at the door knows the road's memory better than anyone. Date, number of heads and hooves, goods declared, weapons held in the armory for the night and reclaimed at dawn, gossip filed as gently as the flower. A farrier measures a hoof by sight and cuts a shoe by ear. A tailor stitches a raw patch on a saddle quilt with a stitch that will outlast the saddle. The headman settles disputes over fodder with the judicial grace of a man who has heard every version of the same argument. We sleep on platforms that creak exactly once, and then agree to be silent. In the dark we hear others moving. Pilgrims murmuring blessings over the future, spicemen counting sacks by touch, a pair of scholars disputing the meaning of a line neither will concede, and the road braids our lives into theirs for a night. Traders change along the way. From the east we brought silk, paper, tea, lacquer, clever tools of iron. From the west come glass, wool, indigo cakes, coral beads that look like berries that refuse to rot, and sometimes the rumour of spices we will only encounter fully when we reach cities on the far side of mountains. Midway goods flow both directions, Khotan's silk and carpets, Turfan's raisins, Aksu's leather, Yarkan's felt. Value is not a number alone, it is a conversation between need and distance. A bale that seemed ordinary in Chang'an becomes princely in a place where no loom can afford patience that long. Language is currency too. Our interpreters earn their share twice every hour. They speak prices and prayers, insults and apologies, weights and measures. They shape contracts in Sogdian with its long slanted letters, render them again in Chinese with brush the width of a goat's hair, copy a summary in a script learned from monks, and seal the packet under clay pinched like a child's ear. In Kucha, a clerk adds a line in his own tongue, wanting the paper to recognise his city as much as his city recognises the paper. The scribe smiles and lets it stand. Documents carry authority because they resemble the world they regulate, many-layered, multilingual, stubbornly specific. Sometimes the desert gives gifts that are not ours to keep. We accept them anyway and say thank you. A sky so clean the Milky Way looks like someone spilled milk and never apologised. A morning after wind when the sand has combed itself into long low Barshan dunes, each crescent pointing the direction the storm ran. The low boom from a singing dune slip face when an unlucky, lucky handful cascades in just the right rhythm, and the whole hill answers with its body. A line of goitered gazelles flicking across the horizon like annotations. Wild onions nosing up where we had no right to expect green at all. The healer's craft changes here too. He cannot boil comfort out of a drought, but he can rub oil into cracked feet, pack a camel sore with honey and cloth, bleed a headache from a pressure point at the temple, lay needles where a shoulder has learned to wear a bowstring and now needs to learn to forget it at night. He teaches us to sleep with our mouths closed against dust, to sip, not gulp, to wet lips before pouring water past them, to save the last swallow in the gourd for the next throat if the next throat's turn has come. He says little, and our listening grows better. We learn to trust signs that are neither script nor star. The texture underfoot changes first on the path where many hooves have compacted it into something like ceramic. Farther out, the crust gives under a heel and sighs. When a line of dunes grows higher, we know a river may be veering, shepherding the sand like a patient dog. Where the wind has planed the surface smooth, we shorten our steps and count our blessings, because miracles are only practicalities that arrived on time. News arrives like weather, sudden, important, not negotiable. A mounted courier catches us between oases, his horse's chest white with salt. He carries a strip of wood with writing tucked into a split at one end, sealed with clay and grit. At the next relay, he will exchange it for rest and a fresh mount. The message tells of trouble on the northern bend and an easier time on the south, and our maps flow like water to follow it. In Khotan, a potter says the Karas to the east collapsed, but the guild repaired it in 2 good days, because the men who know the underground run toward such news, not away. We nod, because in every trade the people who keep the world sturdy are the ones who get the least ceremony. Through all of this the caravan keeps its shape, a patient animal of many legs, held together by habit and cord, by the little bell that hangs from the halter of the lead camel, and by the ledger that says who we are. The scribe's inventory now includes things we did not carry from Chang'an: a bundle of local felt, 2 pairs of boots stitched from leather dyed with walnut husks, a handful of river stones that a boy insisted were lucky and somehow are. He has added a column for water used per day and another for water lost to accident, because admitting loss is one way to starve it. We do not conquer the Taklamakan, we keep it company from a respectful distance. We walk where the land allows, drink where it permits, sleep where it tolerates us, and give thanks by leaving clean wells and paid debts. The desert teaches a grammar of restraint, short sentences, exact words, no boasting. By the time the eastern sky has finished burning itself out and the western edge begins to gather evening, our bodies have learned the lesson our plans only pretended to know. Survival is an art of small, steady choices. The bell marks them one by one, a counting that feels like prayer even to those who do not pray. And when the next grove of poplar and the next bead of water appear ahead, green and credible, we arrive not as conquerors but as students who have, for another day, passed the exam the desert sets without ever writing it down. They arrive like a soft change in temperature. The men who make the road hold together without raising their voices. You notice the Sogdians first by the way they listen. In a courtyard where other merchants talk in bright, jostling sentences, the Sogdian broker tips his head and lets the numbers arrange themselves behind his eyes. How many camels we lead, how disciplined their pace, how clean the cords, how careful our scribe's hand. He reads us as if we were a ledger already opened, and then, only then, he speaks. His coat is a long patterned caftan tied with a sash that hides a narrow pouch of scales and weights. A tamarisk twig keeps his place in a leather-bound notebook. He has cousins in 2 directions and partners in 3. The ring on his finger is a seal, the face carved with a small animal that steps forward as if into wind. When pressed into clay, it is not just a signature but a door through which trust passes. He offers tea darkened with grape syrup and sets out walnuts that crack with a sound like a satisfying answer. He knows the price of felt in Kusha and the taste of the water in Merv, the duty at the Jade Gate and the temper of a new officer near the Torugat Pass. His knowledge isn't gossip, it's navigation. In his language, an Eastern Iranian tongue written in a script that looks as if reeds had learned to walk, letters travel like caravans in miniature. They begin with the tenderness of distance. From your brother far west to your brother east, health to your household, profit to your partners. Inside come the lines that matter, the price of blue glass and saffron, which roots are clear, which wells are kinder, a cousin's birth, a partner's debt, the grain levy raised along the canal, a hint to buy horses now, and hold silk 1 more month. On thin slips, quick notes cross borders more freely than men do, stamped and resealed until the dust at the letter's edge is as eloquent as ink. Some are carried hand to hand, some ride the relay, some are tucked into a pack beside raisins and the luckstone a child pressed into a father's palm. We sit with one such man in the long-shaded room of a caravanserai, a road inn with walls thick enough to quiet the day. Around us the building breathes. 1 door, 1 courtyard, stables with mangers worn into a soft shine, a cistern whose surface keeps its own counsel. The headman at the gate has already written us into his ledger, date, goods, alms deposited. But here at low tables another book opens. It is the Sogdian's notebook of intentions. We speak of a modest thing and mean a larger one. A bale of silk now for 2 horses next week. A chest of tea that will become silver at a city we have not yet seen. A promise that moves forward on the strength of a seal and the fear of losing face. Reputation is the most portable wealth. The Sogdians carry it the way the rest of us carry water. Their credit works like a net you cannot see but feel when it holds. A partner in Samarkand advances funds to a cousin who outfits a caravan in Bukhara, who entrusts a share to a broker in Kashgar, who places goods with a careful captain joining us. Another partner in Merv accepts a packet with a list of numbers and a seal. No coins cross the yard today. Weight moves as words. Later, in a different courtyard, the clay seal will be matched, the account tallied, the profit divided in fractions everyone has memorized and no one writes on a wall. If loss comes, and loss is a travelling companion too, it is acknowledged by weight and by witness, and the debt lives on the page until time, profit, or mercy cancels it. They have words for every way risk can be shared. One arrangement is for venture, a silent partner who provides capital, a travelling partner who provides legs and lungs. When the train returns, the profit is weighed like spice and split. Another is for custody, a chest held in trust not to be opened, with a list sealed to its cord. If the cord arrives broken, the cord tells the story before anyone else does. A third is for exchange, a written order left here to be honoured there, so that a man may go light along stretches where coins invite knives. The Chinese will later call such orders flying cash, for the way value leaps. The Sogdians do not name it so, but they use the strategy with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who recognises a good tool. In the late hours when heat drops its shoulders, deals are made in sentences that sound like lullabies if you don't know the numbers living inside them. 2 bolts this colour, says a woman whose family runs a weaving house, touching the plain silk as if testing someone's pulse. And 3 of thee, patterned at a patient's price. The Sogdian nods and asks if she wants the blue or the blue that remembers winter. A small joke while he adjusts the fraction in his mind. He never hurries the last inch of a bargain. That is where offence hides. He would rather lose a coin than a partner. We follow him through a neighbourhood that smells of wine and ink, past a door marked with a discreet sign. A fire temple tending a flame brought from a far homeland, burning in a bronze bowl that remembers. Inside, the priest feeds it with clean fuel and measured breath. In another courtyard, he shows us a hall where Manichaean songs are sung in a different season. And farther down the lane, a room where a Nestorian cross hangs near a lamp. We are a village that learned to speak many kinds of respect, the broker says, not apologising for contradiction. On the road, wealths are rare. We all drink. His house is a map. Woolen rugs from one valley, painted bowls from another, a pair of boots with stitched toes that curve like commas, a wall painting of riders in bright coats, a shelf of folded documents tied with thread the colour of pomegranate. Children learn their letters on scrap pieces, copying the formula that opens every Sogdian letter. Who you are, who I am, and the wish that both of us fare well. Women manage stores and supervise dyeing. An aunt knows by the bend of a scarf how long a bolt has sat in the market untouched. An old father sits with a cup of warm wine and tells the story of a cohort who went east to Chang'an and rose to the office the Chinese call Sabao, caravan leader, and how his funeral carved in stone showed musicians and traders and a fire altar, because a life is a ledger written in images as well as ink. In the market, the broker's hands never stop measuring. He lifts a string of beads and lets them lap against his wrist, with the small sound he uses to judge glass. He brings a piece of indigo to his nose and smiles because the cake smells like the right earth. He taps a tea brick with a knuckle the way an inspector did at the gate, not mocking the state but imitating its good habits. With a simple balance and a nest of weights, bronze, iron, stone, he turns uncertainty into numbers. He has learned to test dyes with a damp cloth and to peer at wool and see the twist, to look at a reed pen and know how many good lines are left in it, to listen to a man's offer and hear the fear behind it. He knows the mischief of weights with drilled interiors. He carries his own. At his table we learn a lesson that is older than any wall. Double trust makes a road. He trusts us with a bale at a price slightly better than strangers earn. We trust him with a promise bound in clay. He gives us the names of 2 caravanserais that repair harness well, and the name of one that waters wine. We give him a piece of news about a patrol's new route. His cousin arrives with a parchment written in 2 scripts, ours and theirs, and the little boy in the doorway sounds out a word and blinks at his own power. It is not piety but habit that makes the Sogdians teach their children to read early. Letters are the veins in the body of their trade. There are Sogdian homes tucked into the fabric of many cities, Samarkand with its blue promise, Bukhara with rooms that hold coolness like a secret, Merv where canals turn sand into wheat, Kashgar at the foothold of mountains, even in the wards of Chang'an where markets beat like two steady hearts. They build with courtyards and shade in mind, with walls that resist argument and doorways that invite it to end. In the cool rooms, murals show banquets and riders and processions with clothing that looks like song. Panjakent's plaster remembers the tilt of a dancer's foot. Afrasiab's walls remember gifts carried from far kingdoms to a king who sits in stylized calm. But it is the smaller interiors, the painted niches over a bed, the scalloped shelf made by a cousin's hand, that reveal the settlement of a people who travel yet insist on home. Credit is the quiet engine, but language is the oil. In a single afternoon, the broker will move from Sogdian to Chinese to a Turkic tongue to the clipped syllables of a man from farther south. When he needs precision, he calls the interpreter and asks him to make a phrase walk in two directions without losing its shoes. Contracts grow bilingual faces like coins. Witnesses sign with marks that are animals, stars, or little houses. Seals kiss clay and leave the same kiss in every city along the way. Later, when dust has lain thick on our boots, and the memory of this courtyard has faded into a general kindness, a cousin in a different city will break that clay and honour the kiss. We will have lunch before we remember the chain that made such ease possible. At sunset, when bargaining cools into conversation, the Sogdian tells stories that are half caution and half lull. He speaks of a partner who tried to hurry and loaded a young camel beyond reason. The animal sat down at the city gate and would not get up until every mistake was removed from its back. He tells of a letter that arrived 10 winters late and was still welcomed because it carried the right seal and the right apology. He tells of a debt that a man chose to erase because the ledger was older than the friendship, and the friendship had earned interest that the page could not show. He does not call these parables, he calls them days. We watch him settle an argument in the caravan yard with 3 sentences and a pause. 2 young men, one ours, one from another train, are read with the kind of pride the road will polish or break. The Sogdian takes them to the gate and shows them the headman's ledger. He traces the lines with his finger. "Everything you do," he says softly, "takes a place in a book somewhere. Decide what you want written beside your name." They breathe, then nod. The ledger closes like a blessing. By moonrise, he has turned acquaintanceship into a set of small, strong threads. He has arranged a meeting for us with a horse seller who speaks plainly, found us a farrier whose rasp sings rather than screeches, promised to send a note ahead to a cousin near the pass, and purchase from us 2 bolts he will carry no farther than the next city, and still profit by, because he understands how value condenses when handled with patience. He walks us to the courtyard gate and touches the bell on our lead camel with his fingertip, as if tuning the road itself. "Let it keep time," he says. "The rest will come." In the morning he's already at the fountain, talking in low tones with men whose beards grey in different directions. They are planning what looks like a breakfast and is in fact the next month. One carries a ledger with cords tied in careful bows, one a pouch of coins that chime like reassurance, one a sealed packet whose clay is still damp. A boy with ink on his fingers hovers, desperate to be useful. The baker passes flatbread hot enough to make palms shine. A bowl of grapes goes around like praise. When he sees us, the broker lifts 2 fingers in a greeting that feels like a contract renewed. We leave a piece of our road with him, a promise to carry a letter, a bolt taken on consignment, a handful of news folded into ordinary speech. He leaves a piece of his with us, names, cautions, the memory of a seal pressed into clay that will surface miles from now at just the right desk. By noon he will be somewhere else in the market, moving weight with words, gluing cities together without anyone hearing the brush. Quiet power has that sound. The soft page, the patient scale, the unhurried seal, the low voice that turns distance into a form of closeness and risk, into a shared sip from the same cup. And like most of the important work on this road, you only notice it by what doesn't go wrong. From Kashgar the world begins to rise, not theatrically at first, but with a steady insistence that feels like a hand at the small of the back. The bazaar thins into pasture, pasture into stony fans where rivers run out of patience, and then the tracks aim at ridgelines the colour of iron. We choose our paths like we choose a partner, after listening more than speaking. Snowpack reports, the last week of wind, which chieftain smiles with his eyes this season, and which one only with his teeth, whether the pack trails have been cleared of winterfalls. These are our numbers. Torugart if the drifts are rotten but patrols are generous. Irkeshtam if the slopes are hard but the bridges still hold. Farther west toward the Pamirs if spring has been honest and the valleys have not been bothered by men who prefer not to farm. The caravan changes shape for mountains. Camels lead the long approaches, but we plan the handoff on the threshold, where scree begins to move underfoot like bull bearings. Yaks wait in a high meadow, black and dun and smoke grey, their fringed sides stirring like grass in a breeze. Their handlers, families who read the sky like a grandmother reads a child's face, measure our loads with the same reserved curiosity we used in the cities. They bring felt ropes, plank pack saddles polished by generations of ridgelines, and a rhythm that turns gradients into something navigable. Payment is agreed in a blend of coin, tea bricks, and a promise we will not press them to move when the mountain says no. Altitude speaks a sharp dialect. We answer by slowing. The guard captain calls it the long step. Heel placed with certainty, breath taken fully. Another step only when the heart falls back into its proper chair. The healer watches our faces for the grey-green tinge that means too much too quickly. He orders a rest day at a meadow where meltwater braids over stones and no one argues. He salts our gruel, slips butter into tea, rubs a handler's temples with a warming oil, and murmurs to a man who woke with a drumbeat headache that the mountain is simply taking its due in pride. We learn to sleep lower than we marched, to coil our bodies around warmth like commas around a clause. Our gear earns its keep. Felt boots lined with wool, veils for sun and snow glare, mitts that can pull a knot in cold without betraying fingers to numbness. The tool roll is amended for altitude. Borers to drill anchor holes in soft rock, spare rawhide thongs that grip better than any fancy cord when ice slicks a pole. A short-handled adze for steps in firmer drift. For the animals, the yak men bring a bucket of iron points hammered square for horseshoes and a restless coil of thorny shrub cut from a lower pass. The trick for icy ford crossings is to cast brush on the approach and pull it forward with the lead rope as each animal steps, moving purchase under hooves the way a bridge moves under feet. Weather here sends messengers before it arrives. Mare's tail clouds comb the upper air. Tomorrow will be talkative. A milky ring around the sun, then the moon, small ice in the high wind, larger ice at our level before long. Lenticular clouds stack like plates above a ridge. No one marches that edge after midday unless they want stories told about them in the past tense. The guides read the bite in wind, the way snow peels from cornices, the ripples on the skin of a high lake. Their counsel is a chorus of not yet and now, and our discipline is to obey. We cross rivers as if entering arguments. Better early, when snowmelt sleeps. We unlatch girths 2 holes to save a slipping load from pulling a beast under. Loosen the throat latch on the lead animal so no rope can become a hand around its breath. Men space themselves, each holding a pole angled upstream, the current pressing the pole deeper into gravel and giving a third leg. We scout for braided shallows, not the false invitation of a single bright channel that is deeper than the sky. If the water wins, and water wins when it chooses, we turn back to where we stood last securely and call that wisdom rather than defeat. The mountains are old. They do not care what adjective we use. On the snow the world is glassy and honest. The yak men cut steps where drift is set like bread. They probe suspect slopes with a staff, listening for the hollow drum of slabs poised to move. We spread the caravan wide across the bowl of a slope so that no single shudder can gather the whole train into a slide. When a crack runs underfoot with the sound of cloth being torn by a careful hand, we stop until silence regains its breath. No one has to say why. Nights on the high shoulder of the world are a lesson in clarity. Fuel is what the land gives. dwarf willow bundled in neat, reverent stacks, dried dung carried up the last green valley for this very purpose, a few dead limbs of juniper that lend the smoke a clean sweetness. We bank embers under ash, then wake them with a bellows made from a kid's skin. Water boils before it looks finished. At this height it surrenders to the air too soon, so the cook adjusts recipes without complaint, soaking grain longer, slicing meat thinner, asking for patience as seasoning and side dish both. Butter tea becomes less a taste than a policy. The yurt camps we pass feel like moving punctuation marks against the grammar of slope and sky. Black hair tents that flex in wind, white felt domes sitting in the protection of a moraine. Hospitality has a practical halo here. A wooden bowl of warm milk, a strip of dried cheese that fights the teeth and then yields, a ladle of fermented mare's milk that startles the tongue into wakefulness and then calms it. In trade we offer needles, a coil of thread, a printed charm from the caves, a child's pair of bright ribbons, and a packet of tea whose scent can turn a long afternoon into something like a festival. We're guided sometimes by men who play a 3-stringed lute at night, fingers remembering tunes that the wind pretends not to learn and then repeats across the coal. They teach us the names of slopes by the way they shed snow, name passes for the animals that prefer them, name gullies for the trouble they have given. They tell us stories about wolves who learn to walk like men, and men who learn to sleep like bears and woke in spring with better manners. The children in camp reach to touch the bell on our lead yak, because it is the loudest jewellery they have ever known. On the Pamir Plateau the earth looks as if it forgot to stop climbing. Meadows are printed with tiny flowers that hide their faces from the bluntest wind. Lakes lie like mirrors too polished to hold a reflection, and the air is thin enough that a shout goes farther than a footstep. Here the distances are a trick. What looks an hour away arrives after 4. Our interpreters loosen their words. Sentences that were once bound in city grammar become stringed beads, each adequate on its own. The scribe's hand grows more careful because ink thickens in cold, and he keeps the ledger under his coat at night the way a shepherd keeps a lamb. Descending is a second kind of climb, knees argue, loads shift forward and must be repacked lower. The yak men shorten straps, tuck loose tails into tidy fists and take the lead down slopes where gravel wants to move like water. It is in descent that the value of all the quiet preparation shines. A spare pin hammered through a split saddle bar, a piece of leather set between rope and load, where friction could have become fire, a habit of checking every knot as if every knot were new. The mountain sheds us with a shrug, then offers a long palm of valley as apology. We know we are leaving the roof when trees return, first as sketches against rock, then as proper trunks with the dark mystery of underbow. Walnut groves whisper above river banks. Children throw stones at clusters of wild apricots to make them fall in a soft rain. Bees hum in numbers that make the very air feel busy. We bargain for sacks of walnuts, sticky with their own oil and stained from husks that paint the fingers brown, for raisins dried on mud brick roofs, for a tub of thick yogurt that our cook turns into a sauce with garlic and mint and a whisper of salt. Our animals lower their heads into grass with a relief that makes a sound like gratitude. The Fergana Valley and its cousins open like pages. Fields in a good order, irrigation ditches sparkling, prune and mulberry and grape defining the lanes. Towns set back from the river so floods can rage without taking the front step. We sell 2 tired camels to a farmer who will give them a season of easy work and trade for 2 younger beasts, with the kind of ankles that forgive men their ambitions. When the last shoulder of mountain lies behind us like a folded blanket, the merchant's world returns in a rush. Guild signs painted on wood, market cries, piles of pottery whose glaze remembers a distant chemistry lesson and pretends it learned it here. Samarkand arrives like a held breath finally released. We enter on a road lined with poplars that click to each other in passing breezes, and the first market is not all drums and colour. It is a hum organised by needs. Bales are carried to a caravan yard whose walls wear the scuffs of 1,000 such arrivals. The gatekeeper takes our names, numbers, and a handsome deposit to hold our weapons overnight, and his ledger drinks the ink like a thirsty field. The yard offers what caravans love most: stables that face inward, rooms whose doors look on the same shared space, a well with a rope that is younger than the well itself. The bazaars move in layers. Under wooden awnings, indigo cakes sit like black moons, their surfaces bruised blue where fingernails test them. Madder root shaves fill sacks with a dry rustle, promising reds that will not run if the mordant was honest. Weld and saffron argue gently over yellow. A dyer dribbles water down a test cloth and rubs with a thumb. The colour that stays wins. We learn again to feel silk by sound, the way a bolt whispers like a river sliding under a bridge, the way the cheap weave coughs instead. Paper takes its own aisles, sheets that show fibres like a soft winter rain, sheets hammered silky by patient mallets, offcuts wrapped with string for copying lists. In quieter lanes, glass from farther west holds light the way a bowl holds fruit. No trick, just long practice. Coinage turns our fingers bright and dull in turns. We pay with silver to a weight that does not argue, receive copper for daily work, tuck a few gold pieces away where a hard bargain might one day need a softening. The money changers' benches display a small theatre, touchstones dark with the stroke lines of alloys, a nest of weights that fit into each other like conclusions, scales that quiver with an attention more precise than any human face. A changeman shows us a silver coin with a whisper of base metal at the rim. He snaps it with his fingernail and lets the dullness speak. He will not take it. He will shave the edge from an honest coin rather than accept a dishonest one entire. That is a philosophy, not a transaction. Guild signs keep order without shouting. In one quarter, the weavers' lanes smell of damp thread and starch. In another, the leatherworkers' courtyards shine with the oil. Farther on, the metalworkers' hammers keep a steady afternoon prayer of iron on iron. Apprentices run errands with faces so grave they could be entrusted with the treasury. Masters nod to each other with respect measured in years, not decibels. Our scribe learns the location of the notary who writes a fluid, legible hand in all the scripts we require. He will draw up the contract for the sale of a share of our silk against a future delivery of horses and a wagon load of dried fruit. He will keep a copy fixed to a cord in his cabinet like a reminder to the universe to behave. We send word to the Sogdian cousin whose seal we carry. His messenger appears with the kind of speed that suggests he has been watching the gate for 3 days. Over bread spattered with sesame and bowls of stew in which carrot and lamb have negotiated a peace. We settle prices in a language that is mostly arithmetic and partly hospitality. The cousin offers an introduction to a lender who will advance coin against a surety of tea bricks, and he asks in return that we carry a packet of letters 1 city along. We do not see the letters as burdens. Letters are how cities speak when their mouths are full of work. Even in a city famous for colour, serious things have their places. Near a canal side shaded by plane trees, scholars argue over texts with the kind of energy normally reserved for market morning. The bookman's stalls host papers from many mills, Samarkand's own sheets made from mulberry bark, tough and forgiving, the edges soft as apricot flesh. We listen to the copyist's blades shaving the nibs of reeds to a line only a hair wide. Ink stains their fingers a professional honesty. A boy recites from a page, trips, and finds his way back. The merchants smile. The road prefers literate partners. Bukhara's welcome is cooler and more deliberate. You feel it first in courtyards where water sits quiet in square basins, and people lower their voices in respect for the cool. The bazaars are covered in stretches, arched brick that turns noon into something polite. A judge's door wears a curtain that whispers as you lift it. His room smells of paper and calm habits. We register disputes here if we must, about a bundle whose weight wandered between 2 scales, about a die that failed when a client sweated through a dance. Most matters end with a compromise and a prayer that the other party prospers enough to be generous next time. Bukhara holds ledgers like a librarian holds favourite books, firmly, with affection. We study coinage again, because cities shift standards the way rivers move their beds. Some mints strike thin, broad silver with the ease of a city that has confidence. Others produce thick, tight coins that tell a story about recent wars. Our money changer weighs both without theatrics. He keeps aside a tray of worn coins for paying tolls where the scale is only an idea and paper promises are the better currency. He teaches the apprentice to listen. Good silver rings, poor silver clacks, mixed metal lies until the touchstone wakes it. Beyond bookshops and courts, Bukhara feeds the body with theatre. Bread domes slide from clay tandoors speckled with nigella and sesame. Raisins and almonds are sold in companions, the way duty and relief are. A dish of rice and lamb and carrot steamed, then kissed with fat and a fist of spices, turns the road's hunger into gratitude so quickly it feels like a miracle. A seller of knives lets us test an edge on a tomato. A seller of saddles thumps the quilted pad and boasts that it will outlast the rider. At dusk, the covered bazaars exhale into the lanes, and the lanes into courtyards where lamps float like small suns. West again, the land grows broad and thoughtful, and the oasis of Merv spreads out like a generous hand. Canals scribble over sand and convince it to carry wheat. Domed cisterns rise at intervals along the caravan roads, cool-bellied sardobursts that hold summer's temper in check. We pay the canal keeper's man with a measure of grain, and a note that we will pay again when the second cutting comes in, and he marks our account with a reed-cut square. The head works at the river where gates like teeth. A crew cleans silt with the same patience it takes to keep a promise. Merv has learned a lesson the desert taught in another voice. The price of life is maintenance. Markets here care about mass and shiploads, not single sacks. Grain measures are standardized with stone models. Weights are checked against a municipal set that sleeps in a chest with 3 locks. One for the guild, one for the magistrate, one for the guild's rival. A tax is levied with an intelligence that funds patrols and repairs. When it is not, the road finds another city to love. Oil presses sing, turning seed into lamp-air, and a seller of dates convinces us her fruit remembers last year's better water, and therefore deserves this year's better price. We test indigo again, test wool again, learn a new trick for spotting tin in a bronze pan by the way it takes a polish and keeps it. What we sell changes with the horizon. Silk by the bolt becomes silk by the cut. Tea by the brick becomes tea by the cup in small stalls, where tired men negotiate the last mile home. What we buy is a new set of burdens, sacks of raisins that will hold the memory of summer for a winter table, sacks of walnuts, a chest of paper, an order for glassware to be delivered to a cousin's quarter, by a date fixed in 2 calendars. Our scribe works by lamp and moon and habit, turning all of this into the kind of order that will convince men we do not know to recognize us as partners when we arrive breathing dust from a different road. In these cities of light and ledgers, reputation grows like a vine, slowly, with trellis and tending. We leave each gate a little richer in trust than we arrived, our deposit returned at the caravan yard with the nod that means we're welcome next season. Our names carried ahead in letters folded twice. The bell on the lead camel takes up its old duty as we nudge westward again, past fields that pretend to be endless and then aren't, past canals that sparkle like sentences written in water, toward the next hinge city where accounts turn and stories change hands under the shade of a wooden awning. The road is still the road, sand different, wind altered, scripts new on the lips around us, but the logic is familiar. Move what is heavy, learn what is light, keep your word in ink and action, and follow the quiet music of the bell. Ideas travel lighter than bolts of silk, but they leave deeper tracks. Long before we see the next city, we hear it in the songs by the fire. A monk from Kucha hums a melody that knows the same ladder of notes as a tune from Samarkand, and a lutenist answers on an instrument whose shape migrated with caravans, pair-bodied and short-necked in one camp, broader and deeper in another. The instrument changes names as it goes: pipa, barbat, oud. like a traveller collecting stamps. The rhythm of our march borrows the beat, and even the guard captain's footsteps begin to resolve into measures. At way stations, ideas put on shoes. In one courtyard, a Sogdian broker reads aloud a letter in his curling script, while a Chinese scribe copies the contents in brushstrokes neat as a garden. The same message now lives in two alphabets, ready to be trusted by two kinds of official. A Manichaean hymn glows faintly from a painted wall we pass at dusk. Candles, a sun, a moon, all arranged to remind the eye that light is a habit worth practicing. Farther along, a Nestorian priest draws a small cross with his thumb on a child's brow, and then teaches the child to draw letters on a wax tablet. Faith and literacy braided like cord. In a different cell, a Zoroastrian priest tends a flame in a bronze bowl, adding fuel with a measured tilt of the wrist. He tells us fire is a reminder of order, and we nod because the road is too. The traffic isn't only holy. Chessboards appear on carpets wherever merchants rest more than an hour. The game has walked here from farther south. Its pieces have been renamed by every language that adopted it, and argued over in every caravan yard where pride needs a safe way to compete. A knight's L-shaped step makes as much sense to men who ride passes as to men who ride politics. A trader from farther west shows us glass that took shape in a Levantine kiln, and learned to catch light the way paper catches words. In exchange, he buys a stack of paper sheets made in the East, smooth, strong, less hungry for ink than silk, easier to copy quickly than parchment. "What will you do with so much paper?" our apprentice asks, and the trader smiles. "Make more of everything that lives in a line." At a market shaded by grape arbours, a scholar in travel clothes turns a little brass plate in his hands. An astrolabe, its plates engraved with circles that let him measure the height of a star, and so measure the height of himself above the world. He shows our interpreter the star that sits where North lives, and our interpreter shows him how to ask for donkey fodder in 3 cities with different temperaments. When the scholar learns we carry paper, he asks for 12 sheets, and pays in a story about how translating 1 book teaches a language humility, and 2 books teach it generosity. The next day he trades a charm written on dyed silk for a ride to the next station. We all decide that this is how knowledge hitches, politely and with a friendly lie about weight. Food tells a quieter history, but it tells it everywhere. A cook kneads wheat into noodles on a morning when spirits need a lift. A Turkic herdsman stares, then slaps his thigh and shows a way to pull dough into long strands with a twist of the wrist. At a later camp, a Persian trader spoons saffron into rice and calls it perfume you can eat. Grapes won't grow in sand without engineering, so men dig channels where water agrees to walk underground. When the water comes back into daylight at the vineyards, it brings with it the patience that turns a fruit into wine and a raisin into winter's memory. Apricots move as grafts in pockets and as pits in saddlebags, each pit a wager that somewhere ahead soil will listen. Books multiply with paper the way springs multiply a river. In oasis towns, scriptoria hum with the scratch of reeds and the soft growl of grinding ink. A young copyist shows us how to cut a nib at an angle to pull broader strokes from the same reed, how to burnish a finished page with a smooth stone until the ink shines. He has copied sutras, sermons, poems, law codes, caravan contracts, lists of tolls, recipes for dyes that won't lie, even a set of riddles that make our guard grin in spite of himself. He says paper's secret isn't only that it's cheap, it's that it's forgiving. Mistakes can be scraped thin, corrected, and blessed by the patience of the page. In courtyards where judges sit, arguments are decided by words that have travelled as far as any camel. A Persian legal term stands up beside a Turkic proverb. A Chinese seal, bright as a small sunrise, sits under a bilingual contract that includes the promise of a return route. When the whole thing threatens to tip from sense into confusion, a clerk lays a standard weight on the scale of meaning and steadies it. In markets where physicians lay out their tools, you see herb knowledge braided from oceans of talk, ephedra and licorice from one side of the mountains, pomegranate peel and vinegar from another, honey from wherever bees forgive men for needing it. Men practice pulse diagnosis taught by teachers whose teachers studied near a river we have only heard of. Someone mentions a hospital in a city farther west, where patients are treated as if suffering were an enemy to be outmaneuvered by learning. We try to buy the direction more precisely. All we get is a poem about domes and courtyards and a breeze that smells like paper. Not every exchange is official. At a well we share water with a woman whose bracelets tell us she's newly married. She teaches our apprentice how to make a knot that never slips in hair or rope. In a caravanserai we fall asleep to a recitation from a poet whose words gallop, and then walk, gallop, and then walk, exactly like our days. In the morning a dervish spins in a dusty corner until the world's noise falls off him like old skin. When he stops he is smiling, and we suddenly understand a little about why some men leave home to look for the centre under their own feet. West of Merv, the plateau begins to fold, and the road learns a new discipline, the cadence of the caravanserai. They appear at the edge of heat shimmer like low, thoughtful fortresses, placed one long day apart so that a train can reach shelter, without asking the sun for mercy it won't give. The gate rises high and deliberate, a rectangle of brick and stone with a wooden door that swings on iron strong as a promise. An inscription crowns the arch, praise, date, the name of a ruler or patron whose generosity has been turned into walls. You enter through a bent passage designed to make speed slow down, and the cool reaches you like the palm of a calm hand. Inside is a square of shade and order. Around the courtyard run arcades. Behind them, rooms open like mouths that only speak to the courtyard, never to the outside. A keeper's office sits just inside the gate, its ledger ready. He records our arrival in lines practiced into beauty. Who we are, what we carry, how many heads, how many hooves, which weapons will sleep tonight in his locked cabinet instead of under our pillows. He's part innkeeper, part notary, part polite jailer for the worries we set down when we tie our lead ropes. He assigns us a bay for the animals, a platform for sleep, a corner for the cook, and a trough for grievances should any arrive. There is a bathhouse at the back, square and warm, where road dust lets go of skin like a confession. We emerge lighter in a way men understand even if they have no words for it. The stables are the true heart. Wide aisles with stone mangers, tie rings set into columns worn smooth by rains and years. The floor slopes just enough to carry away what beast must leave behind. A channel runs to a cistern whose belly holds the cool that keeps every promise the walls made. A farrier's corner boasts a rack of shoes and a bucket of nails the colour of honest iron. A healer for animals keeps a jar of rendered fat, a roll of linen, a basket of dried herbs whose names we learn by smell. In winter stations, thicker walls, smaller courtyards, hearths low enough to gather round, we see how the same logic is compressed against frost. These inns know the road's other needs. A tiny mosque or prayer room perches above the gatehouse with a mihrab carved into the wall, its niche pointing the way home for prayers that need a direction. A small shrine sits in a corner where men of other habits burn a pinch of incense or tie a thread to a nail. No one argues with sincerity when it behaves well. In the bakery, a dome of clay devours dough and releases it as bread spotted with black seeds. The cook buys a stack and tucks them under his arm like shields. A shoemaker patches a cracked boot with an awl that behaves like a needle 2 sizes stronger than it looks. When he asks for payment, it is small. Paper follows us into Persia like a rumour that has decided to move into a house. The sheets from Samarkand meet new mills in towns, whose names fit in the mouth like almonds. Khorasan cities where water wheels turn vats and mallets teach fibre submission. River towns where rags are beaten until they forget their first lives and settle into pulp. We watch through a doorway as a workman lifts a mould from the vat, catches the wet rectangle just as water gives it back, couches it onto felt, then stacks felt, and pulp, felt, and pulp, until a press can convince them to become sheet, not soup. The sheets dry against walls in a cool room and then are burnished until ink skates across them. A bookshop nearby smells of stitched paper and fresh glue, the tender smell of thoughts taking root. With paper comes bureaucracy light enough to travel and strong enough to last. Letters of credit written on slips that can be rolled and sealed so a man can walk with value in his sleeve instead of jangling at his belt. Orders payable only to a name that matches the name on the seal. In the money changer's stalls, a new vocabulary of trust appears: sack, draft, receipt, endorsement. We learn that a promise written carefully can turn into coin at a table 100 caravan miles away, and that a lie written carelessly can turn into a very long afternoon with a magistrate whose eyebrows point toward the door. Roads improve in ways you can feel under your feet. Canals run parallel to the route and feed orchards that help fund patrols. Watch posts are set on rises where messengers can flash a mirror in daylight and a lantern by night. A courier with a leather wallet rides in, dismounts, and is on a fresh horse before his first mount has finished the water offered. We hear about a royal courier system farther east, where relays are called by a word that tastes like a quick shout. Here the practice matters more than the name. News moves ahead of trouble and behind opportunity. The cook listens for scraps about grain prices. The guard captain listens for patrol patterns. The scribe listens for which town fines for overloaded carts and which merely sighs. Architecture grows like a new script as we roll west. Domes swell from square rooms like well-risen loaves. Brick learns to mimic geometry. Star patterns, chevrons, honeycombs. Glazed tiles catch light as silk does, but more stubbornly. In city after city, markets offer the same categories of necessity: rope and oil, salt and raisins, and then a local surprise: pistachios in one, pomegranates that shatter like rubies in another, windmills in a dry province turning quietly to teach us that even air can be persuaded to work if you give it the right veins. On the plateau, a judge hears a case where a die ran and a reputation might. He calls for the cloth, wets his finger, and rubs gently. The colour stays. He nods and asks where the customer stored the garment. "In sun," the man says. The judge points at the sky. "That court overrules mine." The matter is settled with an apology and the price of a lesson. We leave with the sense that law works best when it respects physics. At city edges, caravanserais change names: Khans, Ribats, Hans. In Anatolia, the portal grows grander, carved stone folding into itself like iced pastry, muqaranas that make a shadowed honeycomb above your head. On cold plateaus, winter hands hunker low, heavy with their own warmth. Summer hands spread wider, their courtyards ready to drink moonlight. A caretaker walks with a ring of keys that could anchor a small boat. Each key speaks a different door's dialect. A bathhouse puffs steam even in frost. A tiny kiosk mosque stands on 4 legs in the courtyard, a little box of reverence on stilts. An inscription over the entry promises protection to all travellers in the name of a sultan whose roads are an argument for his legitimacy. The promise is kept with walls and with staff. Trade thins to essentials, then swells again. In mountain approaches, men want salt, leather, cloth that resists wind. On the plateau, merchants offer kilims patterned like remembered horizons, and copper bowls that ring like a good decision when tapped. Farther on, we meet drovers moving wool toward Fuller's yards. They stop at the Han and trade gossip for bread, which is the road's most honest exchange. The money on tables shifts accent. Silver dirhams still count, but gold from the imperial mint to the west gleams with a sunnier grammar. A changer lays a Byzantine solidus beside an Eastern coin and lets our apprentice hear the difference with his nail. Both speak truth, he says, but not in the same courtroom. The chain of hands becomes a calendar of motion. Day 1, a long march, wind in the teeth, shelter at a Han whose well bucket comes up cold and uncomplaining. Day 2, an easy drift past fields where stubble talks quietly to itself. Then a Han with a bakehouse that deserves to be famous. Day 3, frost, then a son that refuses apologies. The hand's keeper pours thick soup and keeps the ladle moving, until the pot is a story about generosity. In each place the ledger waits. Our names accrete in lines that stretch across maps. The keeper stamps our paper with a seal that shows a lion, a lily, a star. Some nights we sleep under a ceiling crossed with blackened beams, and some under a dome that holds the day's warmth like a kept secret. A pattern emerges. Safety is a practice, not a miracle. Between these shelters, the road teaches through repetition. We learn to recognize a trustworthy farrier by how he greets the animal before the man. We learn which baker salts his bread like a miser and which like a grandfather. We learn the distance between shrines by the number of a prayer repeated slowly, the way a rosary counts miles for men who think in steps. We pass Sufi lodges where men with patched cloaks open doors without questions and feed a stew that tastes like a reason to be kind. We pass Armenian villages where stone churches perch on hill shoulders like quiet shepherds. A priest blesses our caravan with a handful of water and the sign he knows best, and our guard bows even though his faith uses a different grammar. The well is shared, so is gratitude. Paper, now common in our packs, starts showing up in other people's pockets. A tax collector pulls a folded sheet that lists rates by axle and by animal, by weight, and by whim he's not allowed to exercise. He ticks boxes with a reed pen that bleeds only when he presses. In a market town, a bookshop keeps shelves of texts that would have required 100 flocks if parchment were still the only way to speak at length. The shop sells grammar, astronomy, pharmacology, tales where sailors learn courtesy from monsters, and a manual on how to frame a roof so snow slides off like a bored guest. Paper has become a road inside buildings, and we walk it gratefully because it leads to tables where we can sell knowledge as if it were something you could weigh. By the time we reach the last great plain before the sea glitters on the horizon, the chain that began as news in Dunhuang is real enough to lean on. A handkeeper recognizes the bell on our lead camel from the story told by a cousin 2 provinces back. A scribe in a small town produces a receipt form with blanks exactly in the places we need them to be. Goods, weight, coin, date, guarantor. A judge settles a dispute over a broken axle with a joke that travels better than we expected. The road through Persia and Anatolia has not only moved our bodies, it has formatted our days. We rise, we count, we tie, we walk, we untie, we count again. We pay tolls that keep patrols awake. We buy paper that lets promises grow legs. We sleep in rooms that turn weather into a spectator rather than a participant. We pray in whatever vocabulary the nearest roof supports and call that wisdom. And always there is the steadiness of shelter over distance. Walls that remember other caravans. Doors large enough for a laden camel to pass. Water that tastes of stone and patience. Ledgers that say we existed here briefly and left nothing on fire. The bell on the lead camel feels almost ceremonial now. A metronome for conversations that began under a painted ceiling in a cave and continue under a domed vault of fired brick. Ahead, a strait waits to pour land into sea and sea into land again. Behind, a continent's worth of small agreements has made us rich in the only currency that spends everywhere. The knowledge of how far a promise can travel when given a bed each night and a witness by day. At first, it is only a change in the light, the Sea of Marmara taking the sun into long pieces, gulls drawing white seams across the glitter. Then the walls ride up out of the shore, stones stacked into conviction, and the city steps forward until it is the horizon. Towers bead the Theodosian line like knuckles on a fist. To our left, the great inlet opens, quiet as a held breath. The Golden Horn, with masts standing like a second forest, and the famous chains sleeping across the mouth, ready to rise if trouble ever remembers how to float. A lighthouse winks, a promise or a warning depending on the heart that sees it. We have reached the place maps draw bigger than scale. Coastal boats, hired along the Anatolian shore, carry us the last stretch. Their hulls smell of tar and salt and the old iron of nails kissed with rust. Sailcloth is reefed and unreefed with the casual exactness of men who can tie knots in their sleep and often do. Rowers pull when the wind argues. Gulls cry politics overhead. When we pass below the sea walls, stones show their history in layers. Old ashlar at the base, newer patchwork above, repair stitched over repairs like a favourite cloak that no one intends to retire while thread still holds. Harbours unfold around the inner bend of the Golden Horn. Prosphorian with its grain smell, Neorian with its shipyards, and the chime of hammers on bronze, other quays busier with fish and louder with jokes. We raft up against a quay where porters in short tunics and broad belts work like a single creature with many hands. Their language is Greek, but the market answers in more tongues than we can name at once. Armenian, Arabic, Persian, the Slavic of men from the far north, the nasal Latin of a Westerner bargaining as if the sea itself owed him a rebate. Above the docks, warehouses stand with their mouths open, wide doors and cool shadows, cedar planks inside to keep damp from chewing profit. Officials find us before our feet find the stones. The customs house, the Telonian, sits where it can see everything. On a bench under its awning stands a steelyard, beam marked with notches bright from use. Beside it, a nest of official weights, each stamped with a little emblem that says they are not to be argued with. The komakiarioi, the men who collect the komakion levy, wear plain tunics and the look of people who are harder to fool than they choose to show. One checks seals on our bales, another prizes a tea brick and inhales with the satisfied expression of a man greeting an old friend. A third writes a receipt on paper that wears the city's watermark like a ghost of legitimacy. Gold changes hands, numismata bright as new words, and a lead seal is crimped onto a cord to say we are clean. The scribe copies the numbers and a clerk copies the copy. This is a city that believes in parallel truth. Porters with leather shoulder pads hoist silk bolts balanced in pairs, lacquer nested in straw, jars of raisins and walnuts, cakes of indigo and sacks of spices whose scents turn the air into a new geography. Pepper's dry heat, cumin's warm earth, cinnamon's sweet bark. They carry everything into a hired warehouse near the Neorian, chosen for cedar-lined walls and a lock whose teeth make the key feel like promise in the hand. The warehouse keeper counts our pieces with a tap on each and writes our names into his book beside the stall number. He nods toward a shrine cut into the wall, an icon lamp burning in front of a painted saint who has seen more inventories than most King C troops. We nod back. Everyone likes to be part of the routine by which strangers become safer. The city beyond the docks unrolls like a bolt of brocade. A broad way, the Messe, runs like a spine from the Augustion Square by the great church, out through fora named for emperors, Constantine, Theodosius, Arcadius. Colonnades flank it, shade travelling from one to the other like an obedient dog. We are carried with the crowd past statues whose bronze faces forget to blink, past milestone and triumphal column, past sellers of sesame bread who work from baskets lined with clean cloth, and bakers who slide flat loaves into black-mouthed ovens that make the air smell like patience. On the ridge the vast dome rises and floats, Hagia Sophia, the great wisdom, its shell of brick and mortar resting on mathematics and faith. Even the sceptical among us go quiet when we step inside, because light here behaves as if taught to obey him and geometry both. Out again into sun, the city shows its working self. Aqueducts stride in from the hills, the Vallen's long march of arches, and cisterns the size of courage hold water under streets, forests of columns under water, cathedrals built for the comfort of thirst. Bread comes from state granaries in measured rhythms. A boy with a wooden token returns with a loaf that will keep a household from arguing. At the Hippodrome, the Dem, the Blues and the Greens have opinions louder than politics and sometimes about the same things. This spina bristles with obelisks and bronze horses that came here on ships, because this city treats the world as a harvest. Near the great palace, mosaics climb walls with peacocks and vines and hunters who never tire. Guards at the chalk gate stand straight with spears that are metaphors more than weapons. We pass with the particular humility of traders who know the difference between commerce and sovereignty. Work begins where wonder leaves off. Our first calls are to the bankers, the trapezitai, whose benches face the street and whose hands can feel bad silver the way a cook feels rancid oil. They test coins on touchstones and weigh them on tiny balances. A gold numisma, the coin Westerners call a bezant, rings like a clear thought when struck and shrugs off a scrape on the stone with a line the colour of sunlight. The banker nods. Copper for the street, silver for the ordinary promises, gold for the deals you want remembered at court. He offers to hold our metal in his strongbox and issue a note payable at a second bench too far away. Paper follows us even here, light as a sentence and heavier than it looks. Then the guild halls. In this city, craft is law with scissors. The Book of the Eparch, the Urban Governor's Manual, sets the bounds of every trade, and the silk guilds live under its roof as obediently as anyone who wishes to keep a license. We learn the neighbourhoods by smell. Raw silk has a faint green scent of mulberry and damp cocoons. The reeling houses hum with steam, and a whispering chorus as women's fingers find the end of a filament and draw it onto the reel, many ends twisted into one thread strong enough to remember tension. In the throwing shops, men turn those fine threads into strands ready for a loom, doubling and redoubling until the yarn feels like something that won't humiliate itself under the shuttle. Dye houses are their own kingdom, vats for weld and madder, indigo pits that bubble like shrewd thoughts, kettles where Kermes gives up a red as deep as a secret. Purple, the old imperial shade born from murex and law, stays behind locks. The monopoly is not a story. If a robe shines with that seaborne thunder, it belongs on a throne, not a stall. We're introduced to a master who buys our best bolts with the care of a man choosing words for a treaty. He lays cloth across his forearms and listens with his skin. He pinches the weft and closes his eyes. He draws a fingernail lightly over the surface to hear whether the weave tells the truth. "This one for brocade," he says, touching a bolt that holds its dignity like breath. "This one for tabby, honest and strong." He names a price in gold for one, in a blend of coin and future purchase for another. He will add gold thread drawn from strips hammered so thin light forgets there is metal there, and turns them into wires wrapped around silk cores, cloth of gold that moves like water taught to behave. The dyers and patterners speak a dialect of geometry. They show us draw looms that allow figures to rise, vines curling, griffins leaping, saints' halos set into repeat, boys perched above like small kings tugging at lanyards that call up or release pattern cords so the warp lifts in just the right constellation. The designers keep paper patterns rolled in tubes, each roll a chapter of memory, repeats measured in finger widths, annotations and a hand learned from both Greek and the practical slant of workshop speed. We see a ledger with swatches glued alongside the sums, colour keeping the accountants honest in a way numbers alone cannot. By afternoon, the market shows us the rest of the world in compact form. To one side, a Syriac glass seller holds up bowls that catch the sky and make it behave. Next to him, a fur merchant from the north shakes out sable and marten, winter shaped into trade. A man from the Black Sea pours wax and honey into measures that leave sticky promises on the wood. Another sells caviar from a tub with the seriousness of a priest at an altar. Amber glows on a cloth like pieces of sunset, and a jeweller with small tools listens to stones by tapping them gently against his teeth, a habit success taught him before pulleys did. The rope stalls smell of hemp and salt. The oil sellers have amphorae corked and lined up, olive plain and sesame nutty. Overall, the city's own odour, bread and brine, iron and incense. We do accounts in a Pandocaean, an inn where merchants and their anxieties share a courtyard. The owner sets bowls of chickpeas stewed with garlic and cumin, a plate of greens slicked with oil and lemon, fish grilled until skin crackles and flesh sighs, wine watered so that the talk stays level. We tally weights, litre into talents, sacks into charges, bales into shares. The scribe writes the numbers and then, because he is thorough, writes the story the numbers will need to answer questions later. Who said what and when, which seal, which witness, where the sun was in the sky. We pay the porter who kept the warehouse door as if it were his own sleep. We put aside a tithe for the poor box at a church near the docks, because even in a city this grand the hungry are as regular as the tide, and reputation likes to be fed as much as bellies do. A day is set for delivery to buyers we have met by introduction and by the better sort of curiosity. In the morning we walk up to the Augustan, where a bronze emperor keeps his horse moving forever, and the million, the city's milestone, measures the world's distances as if they were just lines drawn out from this very square. We pass through a colonnade where attorneys wait on benches like crows on a fence, ready to pounce on a dispute and dress it in Latin, Greek and fee. At Hagia Sophia, a procession slips through the narthex with soft shoes and a confidence that sounds like chant. The dome floats again, and shadows of golden tesserae grain the air. We buy candles for people we cannot name. It seems polite. Back down the slope to commerce. In a street off the Macy, a Venetian fondaco flies a banner with a winged lion. Farther on, a Pisan house shows a red cross. A Genoese quarter keeps its ledgers with a severity that looks like friendship if you don't look too closely. Their wharves host bales of wool and barrels of wine, and their scribes write contracts that braid Latin and Greek into a single rope. We listen, bargain, incline our heads, keep our own counsel. It is useful to have neighbours who can carry goods home on ships faster than a camel walks. It is also useful to remember that the road we took holds fewer storms and different pirates. Craft lures us again to the silk quarter. A weaver invites us to see a brocade grow from counted breath. Treadle, pass, bead of the shed, lay of the weft, beat with a tap that is more caress than blow, the pattern rising in slow, stubborn clarity, like a landscape becoming familiar. He shows us gold thread couched onto velvet with stitches so small that the metal looks poured rather than laid. In a dye house, a vat master lifts silk from a bath of indigo, and we watch blue turn to blue in the open air as the vat's greenish mystery oxidizes into the thing it was always going to be. In the corner, a boy grinds kermes into powder that stains his fingertips the colour of a vow. A clerk from the eparch's office stops by to count, to look, to weigh. Regulation here is not a threat. It is part of the price of doing work in a city that refuses to let its own reputation be stolen by clever shortcuts. Somewhere between the counting and the marvelling, we become a little local. A baker on a side street sets aside a loaf for us each morning. His apprentice grins when our boy shows up and overfills the sack with yesterday's rolls for the price of a story. A rope maker lets us test a coil by trying to untwist it. When the strands refuse to part, we decide he is the man we will trust with new halters. A lamp vendor shows us wicks plaited in a pattern we haven't seen. The flame burns with a smaller smoke. The money changer waves us forward while a grander client fusses. He has learned that our transactions are quick and honest. A priest from an Armenian church blesses us in a language that sounds like warm bread. Our guard bows. We mark a shortcut between the warehouse and the silk market that saves 5 minutes, which is how you know a city has let you place a foot inside its household. The harbour is a theatre, and we sit in the front row. Grain ships from the Black Sea nose in heavy and rise light. Galleys with their oars shipped skim along the quays like water insects. A repair yard hoists a hull and scrapes its belly clean, barnacles falling like hail. A crane creaks, rope over wheel, a net of amphorae lifted from a hold. Sailmakers patch canvas with stitches long and confident. Rope is spliced as if the fibres had been born wanting to be together. Somewhere a crier reads out a proclamation about tolls for winter, numbers in a voice trained to travel. Somewhere else a storyteller convinces a circle of boys that the bronze horses near the hippodrome once walked into the sea at night to drink. The boys look toward the water as if to catch them at it. We pay duties on what leaves as carefully as we did on what came. Receipts pile into a shallow chest, each with a lead seal or a wax impression of an office that will remember us tomorrow and next season. A trapezoite prepares a letter of credit, rolled and bound with string and a spot of wax impressed by his ring. Its Greek script leans the way his body leans when he counts, slightly forward, eager to be accurate. We commission a crate of glass to be delivered to a cousin's address by a date written in 2 calendars. We settle a small dispute over a chipped bowl with a shrug and a discount, because the price of anger is higher than the price of clay. At dusk we climb to a terrace where the city spreads like a quilt, roofs red, domes grey, sea silver, gardens hinted at by darker squares. Bells answer each other from different churches. Smoke rises straight if the wind is thinking of sleeping, slants if the Bosporus has opinions. Across the Horn, Galata's slope carries houses upward, and far down at the mouth ships move from one sea to another, like thoughts passing from one mind to a second. The chain lies quiet. A heron slides low over the mirror water, hunting with a patience that even merchants admire. Night pushes the markets inward. Lamps flower in rows along the colonnades. In the quarter where parchment still keeps a hold on work even as paper grows bold, we watch a binder sew quires with linen thread, lace boards onto a spine, and press leather smooth over corners so clean you could slice an onion on them. In a wine shop, a group of men argue about theology, with the vigour of rivals at the scales. The owner keeps their cups half full and their hands off each other. A singer takes up a tune with a mode we've heard in 3 different lands, and makes it belong to none of them and all. Trade settles into ledgers as naturally as dust settles onto a windowsill. We tabulate profit in numbers and in what numbers cannot catch. Goodwill earned, a name spoken kindly at a bench we have not yet seen, a clerk who will tell a colleague that our weights were honest when his back was turned. We pay our drovers and handlers extra for the long passes they managed, and they accept without ceremony, which is the best thanks. We buy gifts that travel well and speak clearly. Small icons on wood for mothers, folded knives with tight springs for brothers, silk kerchiefs stitched with a pattern that will make sense in any language, a little brass astrolabe for the apprentice who stared too long at the stars over the Pamirs and now pretends not to be grateful. In a city this careful, even departure is a process. We obtain passes at an office whose wreath of ivy over the door tells you the clerk inside values shade and courtesy. The clerk consults a schedule of ferries and relays. He writes dates in a hand that looks like a calm lake. He advises a route that keeps to well-maintained roads, and hands where the winter hearths are generous. He stamps our paper with a seal that leaves a lion in the wax, then a second seal that leaves a word we cannot quite read but trust anyway. The porter at our warehouse, who has carried heavier promises than ours, shakes our hands one by one and touches the lead camel's bell with the back of his fingers the way a man greets a familiar cat. If there is a centre to the world of trade, it feels for a moment like this, the place where seas meet and continents drink from each other's rivers, where law and weight and faith form a braid strong enough to drag wealth from one shore to another, where silk from an eastern loom is cut by a western knife and sewn with a southern needle into a northern coat. We have come to sell cloth, but we leave wearing a little of the city's own weave, its preference for record over rumour, its insistence that beauty and order are not enemies, its habit of turning strangers into clients and clients into partners, and partners into footnotes in someone else's ledger. Morning again, the harbour salts our tongues. The chain lies, as ever, like a thought across the Horn. We walk our goods down and feel the boards of the quay remember how many caravans they have become the floor for. We load calm, check cords, count bales. A priest we met by the cistern walks by with a basket of bread for those who will spend the day on the water. He catches our eye and draws a little cross in the air, a quick kindness. A banker's boy hurries past with a roll of paper, and the look of someone who knows that value can be carried if it is folded correctly. The bell on the lead animal speaks once, twice, and then begins its patient count of the road's next thoughts. Behind us, the city turns to its work without glancing up, because that is what true capitals do. Ahead, the long way home rearranges itself into days we already know how to measure,